The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another edition of Music Weekly here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt. Great to be back with you in the studio. This is episode number 82 of the Nerdcast Empire and Music Weekly episode number 24, where we bring you the best in rock and metal releases each and every Sunday night. And we've got a really good week of music this week, as we are going to be taking a look at the music from July the 12th and some really good stuff on the docket for this week. We're going to be taking a look at that over the next hour or so. Joining me in studio, as always, the guy who puts this whole list together each and every week. It's Mike. How's it going?
It is going pretty well. Big week this week. I feel like I still haven't completely digested all of the good music that I heard along the way. So looking forward to get into it and talking about what we enjoyed.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be one of those weeks where there's going to be some bands that in other weeks probably would have made the cut, but just because we had so much good music this week that might have got left by the wayside this week. So we will get a chance to show you some new albums and some new bands that you may want to check out when we get to the second half of today's program. Chris joining us in the chat to hold down the chat for us again tonight. Really excited to talk about some new music. Let's do some news headlines right off the top, as we do each and every week. And metal in the mainstream kind of leads off the show this week, as the opening ceremonies were Friday night for the Olympics, Friday afternoon here in the States, Friday evening in Paris. And really the thing that kind of caught my attention was the French metal band Gojira playing a very prominent role in the opening ceremonies. If you got a chance to see it, it was certainly an elaborate performance that was basically them covering a French revolutionary song, Ça ira, which is basically about the Marie Antoinette and the guillotine, and a very bloody time in French history. And there was certainly a lot of blood-like, whatever you want to call it, that were used in that, but just a chance for metal music to be probably seen by as big an audience as just about anything, as the opening ceremonies typically draws a huge worldwide audience. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but really what I wanted to kind of spin it for our discussion on this was the next two Olympics coming up. In 2026, we'll have another Winter Games. It'll be in Italy, in Milano Cortina. And in 2028, the Summer Olympics comes back to the United States in Los Angeles. So kind of the thing, first off, your thoughts on getting a chance to see Gojira, which you and I both did not realize those guys were French, but getting a chance to see them on that big stage. And then secondly, kind of the thought of, okay, if the Italian Olympic Committee or the U.S. Olympic Committee comes to our podcast and they just want to know which metal band that they should contract to perform during the opening ceremonies of those games, which is unlikely, maybe less so in Italy, but more so in the United States. But if they were going to bring in a metal band, who might they choose? But just kind of your general thoughts, and then maybe some thoughts about who might headline the next two opening ceremonies.
I think my initial thought is I think it's so easy to compare the opening ceremonies to something like the Super Bowl halftime show, where it's this huge spectacle that really doesn't matter a whole lot as far as what you're actually there for, the sporting element of it. But I can't help but think metal works. Like, we could have metal in the halftime show of the Super Bowl. Let's do it. Let's just, I don't care who. It could be Gwar. It could be anybody. Let's do metal in the halftime show.
Absolutely.
That being said, if we were going to, did we want to do Italy first, then the U.S.?
Yeah, let's do Italy first.
I think when you're talking about Italy, the obvious choice would probably be like Rhapsody of Fire, anything Luca Turilli's been involved in. That guy's kind of royalty as far as Italian metal, and he has that ultra over the top, Holy Thunder Force sound that I think would really go well with the Olympics.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good choice. I think there have been a lot of Italian bands we have featured on this podcast that you could choose from if you wanted somebody that maybe was a little more under the radar, I guess you could say, and we'll kind of do that when we get to the U.S. as well. Lacuna Coil, obviously another option, another very big metal band from Italy that would make a lot of sense. But yeah, if you want something that's bombastic, that is over the top, that is going to be memorable to try to compete with what Gojira did at the opening ceremonies Friday night, Rhapsody of Fire would be a really logical choice, because they're just going to put on a spectacle, and that's really what you want in an event like that.
Yeah, I think that would be the way to go. And then if we move forward to the United States and LA, the obvious choice would be Metallica, just due to the connection with Los Angeles where they started, even though that wasn't really where they got big, since LA was more into like the glam scene at that point in time. But I mean, you can't go wrong with them. There are any number of other rock bands that I think you could go with, just as popular American rock bands. My concern is that we would end up with something terrible like Imagine Dragons instead.
And what, Five Finger Death Punch wasn't bookable for the Olympics?
Maybe. We'll see.
I agree. I mean, Metallica would make the most sense. And, you're kind of running out of time to get those guys. So I think that would be a logical move. I was talking earlier about you've got some of your big singers of the past. Someone like a Sammy Hagar would make a lot of sense. You could get maybe Van Halen together with Hagar to do something, one of their big hits or something like that was popular the last time the Summer Olympics came to LA in 1984. So I guess I've been a little bit before Hagar's time with Van Halen, but Van Halen certainly that was kind of the beginning of their era of music. You're probably more likely to get someone like Foo Fighters, I think, if you're looking at mainstream rock.
Mainstream rock, for sure.
Because obviously, and you would think, Dave Grohl would come up with something really amazing because the dude's got such a crazy mind for music in general that would be the case. My guess is we'll get some artists I've never heard of probably instead that won't necessarily appeal to me. But again, like you said, the opening ceremonies generally like the Super Bowl halftime show. It's not really for me. I'll go watch the ping pong at 2:00 in the morning.
I believe the phrase I originally said was the opening ceremonies, much like the halftime show, are for people that refer to the actual sporting event as sports ball.
Yeah.
They're not for people who are actually into the sports side of things. And that's fine. They got to have something too, I suppose. But yeah, But kind of pivoting off that, like, where do you put Foo Fighters in terms of American rock bands, just as far as just one of the all-time classics?
I mean, they have to be up there with one of the all-time greats, really, no matter how you judge. If you're just judging on musical talent, I mean, incredible level of musical talent with that group. If you're judging on sales, I have to assume money-wise, they're among the top earning.
Probably one of the few that probably still move a lot of albums.
Yeah, and I think importance, because when the couple of big projects that Dave Grohl has worked on, I feel like you see a lot of people from the music industry jump in and get involved or talk about him in a way that reflects his impact on a lot of people that are in music. So I think no matter which way you want to look at that, I think Foo Fighters has in our generation certainly been, if not the biggest American rock band, one of two or three probably, and maybe top 5 all time when you start kind of judging impact and things like that. So
it's weird to suggest that they're underrated, but I think in some ways they are.
Yeah,
and it might just be due to kind of the declining popularity of rock music in general.
That's probably a lot of it. I think they probably haven't had as much radio airplay as they should have when they were in their heyday, because, like you said, rock music was just kind of going by the wayside. Like, their big hits got a lot of airplay, but there's a lot of deep cuts on those albums that are really good rock and roll tracks that, because of the way music works nowadays, just never see the light of day. So I'm sure if I'm still doing the vault picks as we continue into the 2000s, they're going to show up in there, because there are some albums of theirs,
for sure,
that are just incredibly good and incredibly important. And we'll be getting into the 90s when, obviously we get through the grunge era and when Foo Fighters kind of starts up. And to me, it kind of changed the game there in the late 90s, early 2000s, what those guys were doing. They're huge. And to me, like, if you can't get Metallica for your Olympics, our fictional opening ceremonies, Foo Fighters would be, to me, they're 1A, 1B. Like, do you want the biggest metal act, or do you want maybe the biggest rock act?
I kind of see it as Foo Fighters took over that kind of top mainstream rock band act, like, from the United States. They took that from Aerosmith.
Yeah,
I think they were kind of the predecessor to that. And then Foo Fighters came along and really out of the ashes are Nirvana, obviously. But I can't help but think that maybe that has held them back historically, where no one's really willing to come out and give them the credit they deserve, because in some way it feels like by doing so you're diminishing Nirvana.
Yeah.
Which,
Depends on
unpopular opinion. At this stage of the game, their career has been way better than Nirvana's, and I would argue they're just a better band.
I mean, it's very easy, I think, to make that case, I think, at this point, and what they've done, obviously. And obviously Nirvana had a shortened career, so, I mean, it's not exactly apples to oranges, but when you look at what the impact Foo Fighters has had, it's been beyond most other bands of their generation.
I think you're talking the difference between a band who was kind of the assigned face of the changing music industry coming out of kind of metal and pop metal and hair metal. That was Nirvana, whereas Foo Fighters, you just have had a consistently good rock band.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And one other band I wanted to throw out just as an honorable mention was Bad Religion for this
in
fictional.
LA, sure.
In LA, you got Los Angeles is Burning. Obviously, you could play that one. And again, like I mentioned earlier off the air, because all their songs are less than 3 minutes, or the great majority of them, like if you're looking to squeeze in a song in this opening ceremonies, that they're perfect for that. They can just get in and out in 90 seconds and move on to the next thing. But
There's probably a few songs that you wouldn't want on their playlist, but
I think it'd be
in
fun
the sense of the Olympics. But yeah, I mean they're a great band too.
No question about it. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that in 2 years' time in Italy and in 4 years' time in the United States. And the Olympics continues on for the next couple of weeks in Paris. Just a couple other news items, and really nothing too heavy. We're going to skip ahead to our third news item. And Mike already knew about this before we even talked about it on the podcast, which is not surprising when you hear the news story. Igniting Halloween's 40th anniversary celebration, the German power metal pioneers will re-release their early albums, represented by BMG. Those albums will be Walls of Jericho, initially released in 1985, Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 1 in 1987, which we just mentioned last week, and Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 from 1988. Not a big surprise that those are getting remakes. You have already ordered those, am I correct?
That is correct. I have. I've actually never owned Walls of Jericho, so I'm really looking forward to get into that. And obviously, the two Keeper albums are all-time classics.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 was certainly in the consideration for the vault pick for me this week. Just a really, really great album.
It is cool that they have release dates for like the next sets of releases too. August 30th, Pink Bubbles Go Ape, Chameleon, Master of the Rings. Pink Bubbles Go Ape is a good album. Chameleon's pretty underrated. It was kind of the one that mostly got panned in that time of their career. Then we're talking kind of more when I started getting into them. September 27th, Time of the Oath, Better Than Raw, Metal Jukebox. Metal Jukebox being a covers album, it's the one that has the Hocus Pocus song on it.
Is that Focus by Hocus Pocus?
That is definitely, or Hocus Pocus by Focus.
Yes, that's right. Yes. I got that backwards.
Very easy to mix up.
That's right. Hocus Pocus by Focus.
Yeah,
which
I
again,
certainly recommend that.
Yeah, if you've not heard that, like just you've got to go into YouTube. You've got to type that in. Find their live version from one of the shows that in the 70s. I can't remember if it was a Midnight Special or one of those. They did the live version of that. That'll be fun for Chris because I know he loves when I mention songs that get stuck in his head. So Hocus Pocus by Focus is certainly an all-time
That song
classic.
is an experience. It's not even just a song. Song doesn't do it justice.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It isn't. Like, it is maybe one of the most amazing.
Prepare to have your life altered.
And the thing is, I do want to point out, you need to find the live version because the album version of that song is much slower. But when they went on, there's conflicting stories about why they did it, whether they only had so much time to play during the show or if they just always played it live that way. But they basically sped it up about 3 times, and it seems to get faster as the song goes on. And as Chris mentioned, you've got the whistling, you've got the flute solo.
I'm curious now if Halloween ever did it live.
That would be great to find because that would be a lot of fun to listen to, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely check that out. Bonus vault pick this week, but also some really good stuff coming down the pike for Halloween. If you're a Halloween fan, if you listen to this podcast, you probably are.
And if you're not, you should be.
If you're not, you should be. But that's coming up. One other quick note, and this kind of ties into one of our new albums this week that we try to stay away from the biggest mainstream albums just because I don't want our podcast to get nuked. But the news, obviously, Mr. Big had their new album, Release 10, which came out. Definitely everybody should check that out. That is a recommendation from us. It's really good. Underrated band, really all time. They've kind of decided that this is going to be it. They're going to finish this tour, the big finish, and then they're going to finish. And now the story comes out from Blabbermouth this week that Eric Martin kind of admits he's second-guessing their decision to kind of give it up. I don't think there's going to be any more long extended tours from these guys. I think they're going to kind of keep that true to their word, but it kind of sounds like maybe they might be interested in occasionally recording new music or occasionally doing short tours or one-off dates here and there. A band that's just, it's criminal that they aren't better known and aren't even more commercially successful than they ended up being because they're so good. And they continue to be good. Like I said, this new album is excellent, and it's great to see them continuing to put out great music.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that this band is most well known for providing the ending theme to Hellsing, which was really good.
When does that show up on our
I was so close to putting that as my obligatory ending song on one of the episodes, but I haven't yet.
Make sure you keep tuning into our anime shows every Thursday.
Yeah, it'll be on there. It's such a... I mean, the opening, again, we talked about it. It's fine, but man, that ending is just next level.
No doubt.
What was the question I was answering again? I don't remember now.
It doesn't really... I don't think I had anything specific. Just your thoughts on these guys in general. And
you see so many instances where bands, even this late in their career and at the ages they are, still not being able to get along and having all sorts of drama. It sounds like that's not the case at all with these guys. They're getting along really well, and I think you look between that and kind of this resurgence of that style of music where there are people both actively making the music and people seeking it out. There's no reason why they couldn't do some of the major festivals, here and there, just as kind of one-shot concert stops, like a residency any number of places. It would be a shame when you're all getting along and there's no issues on that front to call it quits, I think.
Yeah, I think they're kind of figuring that out as well. So don't be surprised if they don't turn up here or there. Of course, they lost their drummer, Pat Torpey, in 2018, lost his battle with Parkinson's disease. So that certainly could have been weighing in their decision of, kind of like we saw with Rush, like you lose a member, and sometimes that's where you're just like, we don't want to continue on. They've had a couple different drummers kind of fill in. Edu Caminado is filling in for them now on the European dates, which that name's going to come up again a little bit later on when we get to the new music. But incredible band, terribly underrated. Definitely check out their new album, 10, which is released on July the 12th, along with all the other new stuff we're going to be talking about, which is what we're going to get to now. The music from July the 12th, of course, again, each and every week, Mike will pull lists from various places, and he'll put together a master YouTube list, which he will share in the chat, and it will have as many of those songs from these new albums he can find. Basically, he'll pick one song from each album, put them in this master playlist, and then we go through, we listen to them, and then we try to find 2 new albums that we can recommend for you each and every week. And there, as you can see, is that playlist, which I'm actually going to copy because I forgot to copy that for the YouTube VOD, which I will be putting that in there about this time now. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be seeing that pop up at any time. But one other band I just want to mention real quick that we didn't pick, again, for the same reason with Mr. Big, because it was kind of a more mainstream act. But I just wanted to shout out Tim Montana and his new release, Savage. Not necessarily the type of music I would normally be into, kind of a modern southern rock / country rock, almost like country metal, to be honest.
Yeah.
But what I've heard of this album so far is really excellent. I think a lot of people will know that name because he has been around for a while and has been pretty mainstream, touring mainstream as well. But I didn't want to play one of those songs for fear that we could get in some trouble. So check out Tim Montana, Savage. Like I said, didn't add it to our playlist this week, but definitely worthy of an honorable mention going into this week, along with the Mr. Big album 10. So You and I have each picked 2 albums. We're going to start off with your picks for this week. So what do you have for your first pick?
Yeah, so for my first pick, I'm really excited about this one because it's so off the wall. I've been really lucky for a while now where I tend to run into these bands that are just so different, but not at the expense of being catchy. I think we run into that sometimes where you have the more experimental bands that kind of forget that they're ultimately making music for people to consume and enjoy. That's not the case here. This act is definitely different, but in a good way. That being said, this is the second full-length album by the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania-based rock and metal band. It's actually more of a solo project, but we'll get to that. The band name is Mothman and the Thunderbirds, and their newest album is Portal Hopper.
Sometimes as I'm listening through to the music, because there are a lot of weeks where you will have your picks made before I get through it all, just because of the nature of the schedule. And honestly, it makes life easier on me because I don't have to go through everything. Because it's like, all right, Mike picked these 2 bands. I can set these aside. This week, I did get a chance to listen to most of it before I saw your picks. But when I heard this, I thought, this seems like a band that Mike would pick because it is different, but not so different that it's not good. Like, it was really good, but it was definitely a little bit off the beaten path, which makes it for a very interesting listen.
Yeah, it kind of gave me that same feeling as something like Floating Worlds did when I first heard them, where I'm like, man, this is different, but there's something there. I would argue that this probably isn't quite as accessible as Floating Worlds. It's definitely more on like the psychedelic, out there kind of style, but still really enjoyable to listen to. This is, like I mentioned before, kind of just a solo project of Alex Parkinson. He's credited with pretty much everything. This time around, he did have some help, though. Igor Lapo with some guitar solos, mixing, mastering, and production. Joe Sobieski did some lead vocal work on a couple tracks and backing vocals. And Sam Parkinson provided some guitar solos. So not totally a one-man project, but it is clearly still his brainchild. In an interview with Clean and Sober Stoner, Alex mentioned that he and his wife were watching the TV program Ancient Aliens back in 2020 during COVID, and in the episode they were watching, Mothman and Thunderbirds were mentioned in the same sentence, and he said to his wife that would make a great band name. So, as if Ancient Aliens didn't give us already just so much joy in our lives, now we have this band being named in tribute to that. He also has a really cool Rickenbacker bass that he showed off during that interview, which is, I think, worth noting. According to his Bandcamp, the second album sees the band melding elements of prog metal and dream pop. It's an eclectic mix of adventurous prog, thrilling hard rock, and dreamy psychedelia. It's a good way to describe it because it's sludgy, but not like doomy sludgy. It's bright and uplifting sludgy, I suppose. Not your typical like doom stoner sound that you hear a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned kind of in my intro, it's experimental, but not at the cost of it not being music anymore, which when you go through 80 to 100 new albums each week, you run into those sometimes. That being said, standout tracks on this album to me were Ruby Skies, Liminal Spacetime Continuum, Fractals, Squonk Kingdom, Escape from Flatwoods, Somewhere in Time, and So Long Portal Hopper. Now, when I was trying to decide what we should play here, I thought, why don't we just introduce the listener how I was introduced to this band? Just that way you can have that same kind of reaction I had early on. So the song we're going to play from the beginning is one of the later tracks in the album called So Long Portal Hopper.
So we're going to check that out from Mothman and the Thunderbirds. This is So Long Portal Hopper. Let's check that out now.
Pause
Yeah, yeah, that is wild. Like, and again, I think because anytime I see, if you look at the album art, immediately you think stoner metal.
Oh yeah,
and
very psychedelic.
And with stoner metal, it's got about 20 seconds to hit for me before I just give up on it, because sometimes, like you said, it can be very sludgy, very hard to get through,
Droning at times.
Yeah,
it makes you tired listening to it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. This was completely the opposite of that. It was very bright. But at the same time, like, it still had to get to the music, the singing, before I was like hooked. Where I was like, okay,
you could sign off.
This is good,
Yeah.
because like the beginning of it is like, we hear a lot of bands that do stuff like that, and that continues for 6 minutes of just that. And it's like there's no words, there's nothing. Then it got to the song, and it's like, okay, this has got some potential. And I figured the rest of the album probably kind of build upon that, because that's probably, I'm guessing, on the extreme edge of kind of what the album sounds like. But yeah, I was kind of blown away. These guys are I definitely need to check more of this stuff out.
Yeah, for sure. And what I gathered from their Bandcamp and just reading some reviews is that they kind of shifted he kind of shifted the style of their sound in the last few years. But yeah, this is a concept album. It takes you on a pretty wild journey of this guy going to different worlds, and it's everything you could want. It's different. It's catchy. Clearly, they're into cryptids and things like that. So what's not to enjoy?
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. Definitely check out Mothman and the Thunderbirds, Mike's first pick for this week. As always, you have 2 picks. What is pick number 2 this week?
So going through the list this week, a lot of power metal, definitely. So it was kind of trying out a lot of those bands and seeing which one I thought I was kind of feeling this week, because there were some that on other weeks I may prefer, but I don't know. It's kind of a week by week thing. Sometimes you want over the top bombast. Sometimes you want your power metal a little more hard rock, and I think that's kind of what these guys do. This is the sixth full length album from the German melodic power metal band. The band is Voice, and this is their album Holy or Damned.
These guys were hard to find information on, because when your name is Voice,
yeah.
They want to give you stuff that says The Voice, and it is not The Voice. But this was really good, and as I mentioned in the Discord, this would have been one that I would have heavily considered for my 2, but I had already, because at the end of the alphabet,
yeah,
I had already picked about 6 other albums that I wanted to hear more of, and it's like, man, I hate to do this, but like they're going to just kind of miss out just because I already have a bunch of stuff to listen to. So I was happy that you picked them, because these guys are really good.
Yeah, I think sometimes I have the opposite problem where, I started at the beginning of the alphabet and I'm marking off bands that I think sounded good, and by the time I get to the end, I come kind of biased toward the end of the alphabet because those are more fresh in my mind than the stuff early on, to the point where if you ask me, hey, what was that band like? And I won't remember. I'll have to go back and re-listen to them again just to kind of get that feeling of why I thought they were good to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this band started back in 1988. I guess they took a hiatus around 2003 and then came back in 2017. Looking at the metal archives, it kind of looks like, with the exception of the drummer, Sven Leonhardt, who joined in 2018, band's largely comprised of, if not original members, at least longtime members. Rainer Wild on guitars and Oliver Gloss on vocals, being credited as being around since 1988. I like this band because I feel like the vocals were different than what I hear a lot with anyone calling themselves power metal. Like, it wasn't the over-the-top symphonic operatic stuff. It wasn't overly falsetto laden. Like, it was still very much kind of a hard rock power metal sound, which I think I'm always in favor of. This album does feature some guest appearances: Ragnar Zolberg from Sign and Pain of Salvation, and Hans-Jürgen Reznicek from Pankow and Silly. Bands I'm not overly familiar with, but I definitely would like to check them out. The description of the album that Season of Mist, their web shop, gave, I thought really did a good job of explaining their sound. They went on to say, this work undoubtedly belongs in the collection of every metalhead who appreciates catchy hookiness, a well-thought-out musical concept, and impressive production. Lyrics on the album deal with the highs and lows of human existence. They're about being loved and hated and show how our view of the world can change in a matter of seconds. And you kind of see that in the song titles. You have like the Silence of Prescience, In This World, Dream On, Schizo Dialogues, Petrified Dreams. So yeah, you can kind of see a lot of like the introspective, emotion type themed songs. Standout tracks for me were Nevermore, The Silence of Prescience, Dream On, Schizo Dialogues, Chat Room Whispering. And the song that I picked to check out is actually The Silence of Prescience, which I think does a pretty good job of giving you what their sounds like.
Yes, we'll check that out now. This is Voice and the track Silence of Prescience. Let's check that out now. Yeah, it's really good stuff. I mean, it's great power metal, but different kind of harmonies than you often hear in power metal. It's kind of a heavier, thicker harmony that is as aggressive as the music is. Sometimes, like you said, it does feel like power metal. The singing gets up over the top.
You almost get pretty vocals, I guess, for lack of a better descriptive.
This feels like something that could just be on a thrash album or something that's heavier metal than just like power metal. But I think it works here, and it works really well with the music, and it's got a great sound. I definitely want to check more of this album out. But what I've heard so far, like I said, the track you had on the playlist was really, really good, and definitely want to check out more of The Voice. Not The Voice, Voice, just Voice.
If this was the TV show, I would watch it.
Yes, we need more bands like this on The Voice. But instead, check out Voice, Mike's second pick for this week. As always, I have two picks as well, and sometimes, I do try to find bands that are maybe outside of what I normally pick for this podcast, and sometimes we just get bands that are so much up my alley that I just don't have any choice but to pick the obvious picks, and this was just one of those weeks that I had to pick the obvious picks. Two bands that are on the Frontiers album label. They just are really, really good and really throw back to like an 80s AOR type sound. The first one is the band Palace with the album Reckless Heart. This is a one-man band sort of deal with the Lithuanian-born Swedish artist Michael Palace. It's his fifth album. He's released one every other year since starting in 2016. It's as straightforward AOR 80s style rock. You could have heard this in the middle 80s. It would not have been out of place. Interesting story with Michael Palace. He kind of got his foot in the door with Frontiers, playing with a bunch of other bands like First Signal, Cry of Dawn, Toby Hitchcock, and Kryptonite. And evidently they liked what he brought to the table because they signed him full-time, which allowed him to basically create Palace, the band, his own band on his own. He's written all the songs, he plays all the instruments, produced it, mixed it, and mastered it. So this is a Michael Palace production from start to finish, and knowing that it really was a one-man show makes it even more impressive how polished and how great this sounds. Really, really impressed with this. Standout tracks to me, I really thought the whole album was solid, but if you had to kind of cherry pick The Widow's Web, Back in Your Arms, back to 85, kind of fitting because it feels like this album went back to 85. And the song we're going to play a little bit of is Reckless Heart, the title track to the album, but just really, really fun stuff, really fun AOR music. And we're going to check this out now. The title track of the album from Palace, this is Reckless Heart. Let's listen to a little bit of this now.
You're not afraid, you're a real survivor in the middle of You're the flame igniter. He's saying, baby, you know it's over, but you don't wanna know. He's saying love is a game you're playing, but everybody knows you got a reckless heart. You bet it on the shot in the dark. You got a reckless heart. 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 Tell me when you're gonna learn to find.
Yeah, again, sometimes the obvious pick is just too obvious not to go after. And I just really enjoyed this album start to finish, and it does. Both these groups really kind of take you back to that place in the 80s when you were really listening to this type of music for the first time. But I was really impressed, especially considering he pretty much did it all with Palace. Mike, your thoughts on this one?
When putting together this list, a lot of times the videos I find are just the cover art with the music playing over top of it. And like with this one, the second I saw the album artwork, I'm like, this is probably going to be something I'll enjoy. It screams like badass mid-80s movie poster. There's no other way to describe it. This feels like what Survivor would have eventually become as a band. Like, it has that very similar signature to it. It's amazing to me just how many of these one-man projects we run into. I had no idea that was such a thing, and it's kind of, I mean, I don't know if this is just a matter of people not wanting to take the time to form a band or not wanting to compromise on any of the creative decisions. I always wonder what goes into how you get there, when clearly this guy's had involvement with other acts. It's not like he doesn't have connections. He's a signed artist. I just wonder how you get to that point.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me, and I have to assume some of it is just if you have the talent to do all of that and you can make an album that sounds like this, my guess is you're pretty particular about how you want it to go, and
probably,
you don't have to worry about anybody else having a say in it if you're pretty much doing the whole thing. But hard to argue with him. He nailed it with this one, so definitely check it out.
Yeah, well done, for sure.
Palace, Reckless Heart, really, really good stuff. The next one was the one I thought was maybe my favorite one of the entire week of all of the albums you had on the list. This is Spektra with the album Hypnotized. This one comes out of Brazil. The lead singer, BJ, which I was looking for a first and last name, but he's just listed as BJ everywhere.
Must be a soccer player.
Maybe. Brazil, you never know. But just an amazing vocalist. I mean, they list on their website influences including Journey, Foreigner, Winger. You kind of understand where we're going with this. Big stadium rock, again, that AOR. And then, like, if that wasn't enough, okay, we've got this over-the-top singer that sings songs that are reminiscent of the mid-'80s. The album is produced by Jeff Scott Soto and Alessandro Del Vecchio. So
Frontiers royalty.
Frontiers royalty that is basically signing off on this. Just and because of it sounds amazing. BJ has also done work with Tempest, Danger Angel. He's done a bunch of stuff with Jeff Scott Soto's bands. So just amazing. Then you've got Leo Mancini on guitars, who has played with Tempest and Wizards, former guitarist of the band Nocturnal and Shaman. So he's been involved in a bunch of stuff. And then we mentioned earlier, I said he would come back up. Edu Caminado has been a drummer for 35 years. Professionally for 20, but he is currently playing with Mr. Big as they finish their European tour. He's also played with Testament, with Ozzy Osbourne, Whitesnake, and of course has been playing some with Jeff Tate's version of Queensrÿche that has been touring as well. He got to play part of the Operation Mindcrime 30th anniversary tour in 2018 and the Rage for Order / Empire tour in 2020. So this is an incredibly talented group backed by all of the muscle that Frontiers has. So when you put all that together, what do you get but just musical excellence? And that is pretty much what this album is. It's great from start to finish. Standout tracks, Taste of Heaven, My Voice for You, Our Time Is Now, and the song we're going to listen to is Free Fall. Was just blown away from this right from the beginning, so I'm not shocked when I started researching and found all the big heavy hitters involved in this. This is as good as it gets from Frontiers. especially from from a band maybe that isn't like a very well-known band. This is Spektra from the album Hypnotized. And we're going to check out the first track off of this album. Again, this is Free Fall. Let's hear a little bit of that now.
How do you deal when you take your mind? Deep inside you're so afraid. You think you grew by your lie. So you think you're dangerous at taking bomb. You feel victorious. Defy free fall. Dangerous, too dangerous. One day you'll be.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly going to be in the running if we at the end of the year go back and do like a best of 2024 on this podcast. This will be in the running for one of my favorite albums of the entire year. It's amazing from beginning to end. And if I had to just give somebody a new album that's like, this pretty much describes my music taste on this podcast, this is pretty much going to do that. But really blown away by Spektra and Hypnotized. Mike, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, really solid album from front to back. Like you mentioned, it's pretty much everyone you could possibly want involved from Frontiers is involved in it. There's nothing really I can say bad about it. It's kind of that Frontiers quintessential sound, and it's great.
Yeah, it's just awesome to find this label, and honestly, to be completely forthcoming, I feel like some of the recent releases from Frontiers haven't been quite as strong. But this week they came out. Obviously, they have Mr. Big's release, which is probably the one everybody knows. But these two that I've chosen are as strong a Frontiers releases I think we've gotten in a few weeks. And
Yeah, and that being said, I think if I loved all of their releases, that's probably also a problem.
Yes.
Like maybe they should be casting a wider net as far as the artists they bring in.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's good every now and then when I hear one that I'm like, maybe that's not necessarily for me.
yeah, there have certainly been some we've looked over in the past weeks, but it was hard to look past them this week. They really knocked it out of the park. Some great new stuff from Frontiers Records and other labels this week. Really good music on Music Weekly. If you're listening on the podcast version of this, we're going to step aside for a break. We come back, we're headed into the vault. Mike and I will each give you a classic album you need to check out. We'll do that on the other side of this time out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire live on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. You can listen to previous editions of the Nerdcast Empire. Check out some of our past editions of Music Weekly. We are almost a half a year into Music Weekly, just a couple weeks away from that. We're just about to the 1 year mark of the Nerdcast Empire. Thank you all so much for listening. Wherever you listen to us, wherever you check us out, whether you're live, watch a VOD, download a podcast, we're incredibly grateful. We definitely want to continue to encourage people to go to our Twitch page and click the follow button. Doesn't cost you a thing. It's completely free, but it allows us to continue to grow our Twitch page and allows us to continue to grow our podcast as we just continue to want to do bigger and better things in year number 2, which is just getting underway. Upcoming schedule, Thursday night, Mike and I will be back with you, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Anime Thursdays on the docket this week. I believe we're going to be getting into some 3x3s this week. We saw an interesting post talking about people creating 3x3s based on My Anime List scores, and like, well, what if you only choose anime that you like that are under 8 on My Anime List? So Mike and I are going to kind of play with that idea. We're going to come up with those coming up on Thursday, so we hope you'll join us for that, on top of just the regular anime news that we check out every Thursday. Next Saturday, probably 10:30, 11 o'clock, maybe a little later on the East Coast, we'll be back with another premium live event wrestling recap as SummerSlam comes your way next Saturday from Cleveland Browns Stadium in Cleveland, Ohio. And we'll be wrapping that up on Saturday evening, letting you know what we thought about WWE's biggest party of the summer. And then on Sunday, another edition of Music Weekly. It'll be number 25 of Music Weekly, and we'll be checking out the music from July the 19th. Hope it has as strong a music list as we had this week. Really great stuff this week, but that'll be coming up next week. So 3 podcasts for you in the coming week. It's going to be a lot of great stuff. We hope you continue to check it out this coming week here on the Nerdcast Empire. But it's time to go into the vault each and every week we will give you a classic album you need to check out. Mike is continuing through the alphabet, and of course, based on, even if you didn't know when Mike started this, knowing that we're on the 24th episode of Music Weekly, you have to know that we are getting to the end of the alphabet. So the challenge the last couple of weeks, you've had kind of a slimmer selection to choose from. Maybe a few more options here this week, but you've kind of gone with something that's maybe a little under the radar for your vault pick this week.
Yeah, the letter W is actually way more stacked than you would think. Lot of hair bands started with W, oddly enough. Then you have like White Zombie, So there are definitely some options. The one I went with was, oddly enough, a Frontiers band, because why not?
Of course.
I can't remember exactly how I found out about these guys. I want to say it was one of the streaming radio apps at some point. Whatever type of station I had it select, it pulled these guys out for me. But it's the fourth studio album from the Norwegian glam metal band. The band is WIG WAM, and this is their album Wall Street.
Yeah, I didn't see this one coming, even though I do know WIG WAM and probably familiar with some of their music. But again, I think as far as underrated picks go, you could have certainly gone with maybe some better known choices, but this is a really solid pick.
Yeah, it really kind of came down to, I'd narrowed it down to two picks. It was these guys and then also Winger's debut album. I think Winger's a highly underrated band, a band that got maligned a lot, I think both due to Metallica and Beavis and Butthead, but Kip Winger's really talented bassist and singer. Reb Beach, the guitarist, dude's super talented as well. And just their sound was as far as that style of music, they're definitely on the short list of bands that I thought were really, really talented that did it. But moving back into WIG WAM, this is a band from Norway, founded in 2001. They got that very typical Frontiers, catchy melodic hard rock sound, kind of borders on sleaze sometimes. I liken them in a lot of ways to like Steel Panther, but not like a parody. They don't take themselves super seriously, but it's not Steel Panther territory, which is beyond parody, I think.
Yeah.
They represented Norway in the 2005 Eurovision contest, which, according to Wikipedia, was actually the first metal band to do it. They actually beat Lordi to the punch. They split up in 2014, but came back in 2019. They actually were having some issues in the early 2020s where they had actually been dropped by their booking agency because I guess they just weren't getting anywhere. But in 2022, they actually had a song, Do You Want to Taste It? That was featured on James Gunn's Peacemaker series. Another song of theirs actually ended up on the soundtrack to the series, and that kind of reinvigorated their career, which is great because I'm a fan of theirs. That led to them being able to tour the U.S. and even play at the Whiskey A Go-Go, which, for a glam band, that's like Mecca, essentially. So definitely a major career goal reached as a result of kind of getting that attention from the Peacemaker show. Bands inspired by Kiss, Sweet, T-Rex, Slade, what you'd expect from a glam metal band, Queen, Aerosmith. The name WIG WAM is actually taken from the Sweet song Wig Wham Bam, which, if you've not listened to Sweet's greatest hits, you really should. Super catchy, fun music. I certainly enjoy it. I think the song I first heard from this album was the title track, Wall Street, which is really catchy. A lot of the stuff on the album is kind of that anthemic, almost arena rock meets sleaze rock sound. Standout tracks include Wall Street, Victory Sweet, Bleeding Daylight. A softer song like Tides Will Turn is also really good. They got a couple songs that I think kind of border on southern rock, Wrong Can Feel So Right and Natural High. And then they even have some synthy stuff, kind of like the song 1 Million Enemies. But I think if you like melodic rock, there's something that you're going to enjoy from this album, and I certainly recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with a couple of their songs, but again, being a Frontiers band and maybe one of the earlier Frontiers bands, you know what the music's going to sound like. It's going to be catchy. It's going to be fun. They're going to have good melodies, probably. Yeah. Like, it's kind of that traditional Frontiers group. But great to see them still around too. Like you said, getting the song on Peacemaker, and then they released a new album in 2023, Out of the Dark. So they're continuing to make music, which is great after that hiatus of about 9 years where they, look like maybe they were done, not necessarily by their choice, but they're back rolling again. So hopefully they continue to make new stuff. And being with Frontiers, I would not be shocked to see another new album come from those guys maybe sometime in 2025. So,
Absolutely.
definitely check that out, though. Wall Street from WIG WAM, Mike's choice in the vault this week. So now is the time of the program where we go through and we talk about all the albums that came out in the year that I picked. Of course, we've been going through the years. We started several weeks ago, obviously, in 1969 with the Chicago Transit Authority, the first album from the band Chicago. And then we've gone year after year and picked albums each year. And we're up to 1988 now. And again, now we're getting to the point where there are just so many great albums each and every week. So we'll run down some of the ones, and I know Mike will probably find a couple that I've missed before we get to the one I picked. You had Iron Maiden's Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, came out in 1988. You had Open Up and Say Ah, came out in 1988. Vivid from Living Color came out in 1988, which, of course,
Nice.
best known for Cult of Personality, which is certainly relevant to our podcast. And Justice for All from Metallica came out in 1988. Another one, King's X, Out of the Silent Planet, came out in 1988, and that had some of my favorite King's X songs on there. You mentioned Winger. Their debut album came out in 1988, so could have actually, in theory, picked the same album for the vault this week. Didn't work out that way, unfortunately, for Winger, but definitely should check that album out. That's a good one. Van Halen's OU812 came out in 1988. Classic album. More stuff this week. So Far, So Good, So What came out in 1988. Naked, the Talking Heads album, came out in 1988. That included my favorite Talking Heads song, Nothing But Flowers. So certainly
Great song.
relevant to our podcast. The one that was probably the runner-up this week was Odyssey by Yngwie Malmsteen, and probably my favorite Malmsteen album. Joe Lynn Turner wrote all the lyrics for this and sang on that album, included Rising Force, Hold On. My favorite Malmsteen song, Heaven Tonight. It's just a great album. Everybody should check that out. Chicago 19 came out in 1988, which included I Don't Want to Live Without Your Love, We Can Last Forever, Look Away, What Kind of Man Would I Be? Definitely some of their slower stuff in the post Peter Cetera era, but some really good stuff if you like kind of the slower stuff. Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2, as we mentioned earlier, came out in 1988. And then a couple of non-metal rock albums. Roxette's Look Sharp came out in 1988. That included The Look and Dangerous and Listen to Your Heart, three of my favorite Roxette songs. And then I just could not mention All or Nothing from Milli Vanilli, came out in 1988.
Oh, wow.
Which included Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You, Baby, Don't Forget My Number, Girl, You Know It's True, the Super Club mix. Definitely couldn't not mention that. But in amongst all of those, the album I picked for the vault in 1988 was, I think, what was the most important album of 1988. It was an album that I know Mike will even have more to say about, being that he's the one that introduced them to me. And, of course, we've already kind of talked about these guys. It's Queensrÿche with Operation Mindcrime. Maybe certainly one of the, if not the best concept album and rock operas of all time. It is an album that obviously is tied together with the songs and the story of Dr. X and everything that goes along with the album. But in the end, it's just an album, or two albums, I guess, two sides that are just full of great songs. People know the singles tracks, I Don't Believe in Love and Eyes of a Stranger's Criminal, as I mentioned earlier on the Discord, that Operation Mindcrime wasn't a single, because that is a great song, even if it wasn't surrounded by this album. But you've got things like I Remember Now to open up track 1 that leads you into Anarchy X, and then Revolution Calling, track 3, a great one. Spreading the Disease, and you have The Needle Lies, which starts off side 2, then Breaking the Silence, it goes into I Don't Believe in Love, and then after a couple of shorter tracks, you end up with Eyes of a Stranger that wraps up side 2. It's just an amazing album that is probably, there's probably people in the progressive scene that hold this to, the standard it needs to. But I think generally in the rock scene, this is an underrated album. I think people don't talk about this enough. Definitely a huge album for Queensrÿche. And maybe one of the saddest things we talked about off the air is that for whatever reason, the new version of Queensrÿche doesn't play a lot of songs off of this album or Empire when you go see them live, or at least they didn't the last time we went and saw them live. And those are probably two of my favorite albums from Queensrÿche. And that's kind of a shame that those maybe don't get the love live that they used to. But this Mindcrime, if you're a fan of rock, progressive rock, this is definitely something you need to check out. It's required listening, I think, to really kind of get this podcast. I know, Mike, you like I said, you introduced them to me, so I want to get your thoughts on Operation Mindcrime.
Yeah, I just wonder, first off, if there's just some sort of weird, like, unwritten agreement between them and Jeff Tate, where it's like, we're not going to highlight some of these later albums as much, and we're going to let your solo act kind of do that. Because I feel like, I know that like a lot of the diehard Queensrÿche fans love that early material, and so does the band clearly. But I feel like they disproportionately favor it over what I think are their two best albums, Mindcrime and Empire. If I remember right, I originally got Operation Mindcrime. If I'm right about this, I feel like my buddy Todd had a copy of it that he just found and gave it to me, and that was when I first heard it, and I eventually bought it. But I'd known Empire at that point, but wasn't familiar with Mindcrime. But I'm amazed at how you can create a concept album that has such a strong story to it, but can somehow fill it with so many just single-worthy songs. Mm-hmm. Like, so many of those songs stand up so well on their own. And I do kind of wonder if, to some degree, that's why Mindcrime itself was never a single, because it's so tied to the story. Like, maybe they thought it wouldn't have that same kind of impact as something like Eyes of a Stranger or I Don't Believe in Love, which kind of stand on their own a little better, maybe.
Yeah. And it's funny, though, because you listen to satellite radio now, and it's not unusual to hear Mindcrime on the radio. It's just for whatever reason back then, they just didn't see it that way.
Yeah, and it's... I'll never know. I mean, I can only assume that must have something to do with it, but there's so many songs on this album that should be hits, even that weren't, I imagine. But my favorite concept album of all time, I would say, and definitely something everyone should listen to.
No question about that. Was there anything else from 1988 that I missed out on?
Let's see if I can catch what all you didn't mention here. The self-titled LA Guns album came out.
Yeah. That was...
Testaments of the New Order, Blind Guardians, Battalions of Fear, Steve Winwood's Roll With It.
Yeah.
Slayer, South of Heaven, Cinderella's Long Cold Winter, Marty Friedman's Dragon Kiss.
I was going to mention that.
Danzig's self-titled.
Yeah.
Bad Religion Suffer, King Diamond's Them, Kix's Blow My Fuse, Anthrax's State of Euphoria, Rats Reach for the Sky, and Dawkins' Beast from the East.
Okay. So, yeah, there's really...
A lot of stuff that year.
A lot of stuff in 1988, and each year that goes by, it just continues to pile up more and more great music. But this week, it will be Operation Mindcrime holding down the spot for 1988. That is going to bring this podcast to a close as we have wrapped up another edition of Music Weekly here on the Nerdcast Empire. Another great week of music for sure. Really, really like the new stuff this week. And, of course, Vault stuff's always a lot of fun. And next week, we'll be talking about the music from July the 19th. So make sure you join us 7 o'clock Eastern Time next Sunday here on the Nerdcast Empire. Don't forget, Thursday night, Anime Thursdays, once again, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And then Saturday, probably 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be recapping SummerSlam coming up live from Cleveland, Ohio. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of the podcast. Big thanks to Chris for holding down the chat once again this week. Big thanks to Mike for all of his hard work putting this together each and every week. And a big thanks to everybody who's listened, whether you're listening live, whether you're listening on the VOD, whether you listen on the podcast. We appreciate all of you, and we can't thank you enough for getting us through this first year of the Nerdcast Empire. That's going to wrap things up for this week for the entire crew. I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.